Join us in today's conversation when we speak with Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb simultaneously in a roundtable discussion. For all the parents out there who might have kids who don't know anything about ETs or UFOs, what would your advice be to a parent whose child comes to them and says, I saw an alien or I was on a spaceship or something like that? Have you ever encountered that type of thing?
Oh, many times. Sure, Mary has too. Yes, I think it's very helpful if the parents will. So parents, yes, they could be experiencers themselves and yet still not really catch on about the child having experiences as well.
I was warning that a research is really about nuts and bolts, is about qualifying and validating the fact you've had an experience. They're not there to help you work through what your experience may be. And if that's what you're looking for, a researcher isn't going to, that is primary, a researcher is not going to help you with that. They may open up things that you are experiencing and have no way of helping you through them. So it's very important, first of all, to know what the background is of the person that's helping you with your experiences and be very careful whether or not they have the expertise to help you through what's actually happening as well. In the sense of being aware that most of those that have experiences are opening up multidimensionally in their awareness, where, what we would call is psychic or intuitive, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. Those abilities start to expand the more they open to their experiences, and to have a therapist that understands that.
That I have worked with and others have worked with who have been healed by the extraterrestrials. So I am not personally aware of any people who've had adverse effects or have had a condition be worse after an encounter.
Because I believe this is not just thousands or millions, I'm talking about billions of people, I believe, on some level have had this kind of interaction. They may not know what to make of it, they may not know how to interpret it, they may see it as a spiritual experience or just they're a bit strange or unusual. But ultimately, this kind of activation is happening, I believe, to create a collective awareness, a collective consciousness.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is another edition of Universal Disclosure, Meeting the Moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu. I say it every time. How are you? It's got a good rhyme.
Thank you. I love hearing that at the start, Mike. It's fantastic. Things are going well as per usual. I'm very thrilled about our show today. This is a real first, I think. Or might be. I'm interested to ask them.
Yeah, a little bit of a long time in the making here, but we've individually spoken with each of these ladies, and now we're bringing them together simultaneously for a roundtable event. It's not like it's never happened before, but it's sort of a rare, exclusive kind of conversation we're going to be able to get to have. And who are we talking with today, Stuart?
Well, we're talking to none other than Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb, both therapists that work with experiences. And I'm very interested to know what sort of data correlation they've noticed, what themes are emerging.
Yes, I also want to know the same. And in case anyone out there doesn't know, and again, we've spoken with each of these ladies individually. We'll put a link to their individual episodes in this description. You should absolutely check that out as well. But they are effectively like the top leading authority figures in alien abductions, as it were. Both of these ladies are professional therapists, and they have both individually helped many thousands of people work through their abduction experiences. So to have them both on screen at the same time is just going to be freaking awesome.
Oh, it's fantastic. Now, Mary and myself are in Australia, and Barbara and yourself are in the United States. So I love this two countries getting together to solve these problems and explore this topic.
Exactly. We are all friends in more than one way, right? And the interesting thing is, we even know you and Mary are in Australia, and myself and Barbara are in America. We've got 4 different cities right now, and I think 3 different time zones in play. So this is amazing that we can all come together like this. It's going to be out. Anyway, shall we just get right down to it, Stuart?
Thank you. Really looking forward to this, Mike.
All right. You want to do the intro honors?
Oh, well, thank you. Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb.
All right. So, ladies, thanks so much for joining us again. And I think it's great that we have you, even though it's a limited time, together all on the same screen. And we have some questions to ask, but we also want to encourage you to ask each other questions too, just to sort of have like a little bit of a roundtable thing here. But sort of to get things moving along, one of the questions that I had, because you both worked with thousands of people individually, and I'm pretty sure that the children were involved in that. And I was kind of wondering, for all the parents out there who might have kids who don't know anything about ETs or UFOs, what would your advice be to a parent whose child comes to them and says, "I saw an alien," or "I was on a spaceship," or something like that? Have you ever encountered that type of thing?
Oh, many times. I'm sure Mary has too. Yes, I think it's very helpful if the parents will ask them about it and listen to them, and if possible, believe them. And it happens so typically that their children have these experiences, and then they try to tell their parents, and they tell in the way that they can, which might be, "Oh, the little man came to my room again last night," or "the little woodgies came," or "the little monster came," or "the funny looking little guy came," or things of that sort. And they don't have a name for that being or multiple beings. And the parents usually, at least as far as I know, they usually say, "Oh, well, that must have been a dream," or, "You have a good imagination," or maybe that's one of your imaginary friends. And the kid will say, "No, no, he was really right there, right by my bed, or looking through the bars of the crib," or whatever. And they don't get believed in so many cases. And so that's really difficult. They find they have no one to talk to who will believe them, nobody to help them with that. So I really encourage parents to listen to the child, let him say anything he wants to say, express anything that he wants to express. And whether the parents really believe it or not, at least give the child a chance to at least be accepted for what he's saying. Because very often the parents will say, "Oh, don't talk like that," or don't ever tell me that sort of thing again. And that's very, very discouraging. So that's very important. And that's why I wrote a book about, for children, about children's extraterrestrial experiences. It's called Kids Adventures with ET Friends in Space. And it tells about 18 different scenarios that children have reported to me that they have had. And they're pretty typical from what I hear from Mary and others. So there is at least that out there to help children and help the parents to be able to believe the children when the child says such and such thing happened, and they see that in the book that other children are having, and that a therapist worked with those children. It really helps the parents to believe, and sometimes it will actually trigger the parent who's reading the book to the child, or the grandparent even, to realize that, oh, they too have had those kinds of experiences. So it can be helpful all the way around. What do you think about that, Mary?
Oh, Barbara, exactly right. One of the things that I do say to the parents is if your child can draw what they're seeing so that we can get a better idea of what is actually going on, because you get a lot from a drawing that the child maybe cannot, hasn't the vocabulary to show what's actually going on. I
Mhm.
also have a questionnaire for children
Oh,
where a lot of things are asked that the parents don't think to ask
oh,
about their experiences. So they'll say, I didn't know my child went and did this. I didn't know that they were seeing this coming from me, or the energy field. I didn't realize. So the questionnaire really helps them know what to ask, because they don't often know what to ask the child, because the child thinks, well, everybody experiences it, don't they? Because I
yes,
see it. So you know what I mean? They think that
yes,
everybody else is seeing the same things. And of course, they're not. And obviously, the more the parents understands their own experiences, because we know this is intergenerational. So I'll say, okay, so where are you experiencing things, so that you can understand more of what is actually happening to the child. So getting the parents more interactive with the child around their experiences. And what you said is absolutely spot on, is listening to them, is hearing them, because otherwise they can shut down and then you don't know what's happening at all. So it's wonderful that you've written a beautiful book around that, Barbara, as well. And of course, I
Mhm.
mention it in New Human as well, these wonderful children and what they're telling us.
Oh, yes, and you've worked with so many children too, and I think you've worked with more children actually than I have. But those whom I have worked with, it's been absolutely wonderful. Yeah, and they are so appreciative, to have somebody who believes them and
Yes,
knows something about this. It's usually other people they know, including their parents, don't. So parents, yes, they could be experiencers themselves and yet still not really catch on about the child having experiences as well. If they know a lot about the phenomenon, as many people do, and you and I certainly do, uh, they might know that, oh, yes, it's very likely that a child of an experiencer will be having these experiences too. But often
absolutely.
Interesting.
I have found the parents, even though the parents have had these experiences with the other beings, sometimes they don't want their child to be having those experiences. So if the child starts mentioning something about that, these visitors were there last night in my room. The parents sometimes I've actually known a couple of cases like this where the parents would say, "Oh, don't talk about that sort of thing. We don't talk about that in this house," because the parents have not really faced what's happened to them. And of course, they probably haven't had regressions, or they would most likely be more at peace or even thrilled, by the way, that they're having these experiences. But if they haven't looked into it and they've tried to repress it and deny it, then if a child speaks, they'll usually just shut that child right up, which is very unfortunate.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is incredibly important work that you're both doing. Are there other therapists coming up to continue this amazing work that you're aware of in the future?
Yeah, well, there are people, more and more people now are being trained in the QHHT regression method, um, put together by Dolores Cannon, who's no longer with us, but her daughter, Julia, is carrying on the training. And my impression is I have not taken that training. I was trained many years before she started teaching that. But anyway, my impression from people who are taking it now is that it's a very good, very thorough training. So I would imagine that a number of them, maybe all of them, eventually will be working with people who experience visits from the extraterrestrial beings. So that's good. And there are others too currently that I know of, don't maybe know them personally, but know of them. But it needs to be done a whole lot more, in my opinion.
That was actually one of my questions for both of you. Is if you could just give us like if somebody's interested in exploring regression themselves or whatnot, aside from you, there's many other people who are offering it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have your level of experience and training. What should people look for in searching out a therapist if they want to explore this? Like, are there certain like red flags or certain maybe green flags? You know, like look for this and look for or avoid that kind of thing.
Right. I'm going to jump in because I
Yes.
have only a minute or so left, I think, to be with you, unfortunately. Um, I think it would be good to question the regression therapist if you're getting in touch with one, and ask if they deal with unusual subjects, paranormal subjects, extraterrestrial subjects. And if the regression therapist says, no, I don't really deal with that, or I don't know about that, then that would not be a good person to go to. But if the therapist says, oh, yes, I've had a lot of experience with that, I'm very familiar with working with that, then that would be a clue that would be a good person to go to.
Okay.
But people have so often reported to me that they've gone to regular therapists, regular psychotherapists of many different kinds of licenses, and so frequently that therapist has not been aware of this whole phenomenon. I hope more of them are becoming more aware nowadays, but that was certainly true back in the 1990s when I started doing this work, 1991. People would report that they had gone to their regular psychotherapist, and the therapist just really didn't know anything about it and didn't know what to do about it, didn't know how to pursue it. And I hope that's changing a bit, but I really don't know.
So, Mary, do you have any on that same question in terms of what to look out for or what to look away from in terms of regressionists?
I think it's very, very important that you find someone who does understand the phenomena, or at least is accepting it's possible or whatever. When I wrote Awakening, one of the things was the difference between a researcher and someone who's coming in therapeutically to assist you with your experiences, because I was warning that a researcher is really about nuts and bolts, is about qualifying and validating the fact you've had an experience. They're not there to help you work through what your experience may be. And if that's what you're looking for, a researcher isn't going to, that is primary, a researcher is not going to help you with that. They may open up things that you are experiencing and have no way of helping you through them. So it's very important, first of all, to know what the background is of the person that's helping you with your experiences, and be very careful whether or not they have the expertise to help you through what's actually happening as well. So that's very important with that side of it. In terms of modern psychology and psychiatry, we're still in a flux, because it's still with the truth embargo. Nobody still is in the therapeutic arena generally admitting that this is an experience. So you're taking your life and your psychological health, you know, you have to be really careful about who you access. And I always say that if you do go to someone who has those skills, asking some questions, even do it anonymously first to them, so they don't know who you are. You can get away with just saying, are you open to this kind of experience? Do you have any expertise in that? Because it'll be very clear where they say, well, I don't believe in it. I don't believe in any of it. There right away is your red flag. That is not the person for you. There are clinical psychologists, for example, as well as hypnotherapists, that are very open to this. So it's about asking some very clear questions about their awareness and their understanding to start with. And then you're not putting yourself on the line by going there, exposing this. There was a very clear story once of a clinical psychologist, well, a gentleman who got in touch with me because he'd been to a clinical psychologist and said, as soon as I mentioned my ET encounters, they said, oh, you must have had trauma in your childhood. And he literally walked away, got in touch with me and got some help. Interestingly, a few years later, a particular clinical psychologist got in touch with me and said, I've had experiences, but I feel terrible because a few years ago, I had a gentleman come in and tell me that he'd had experiences and I told him it was trauma in his childhood. And now I feel absolutely terrible about it. And believe it or not, who it was. So
Oh my
these
gosh.
work really, really interesting ways, sometimes where but it really is about you checking out who it is that you're getting your help from and resort. What are their skills and whether or not they are open to the fact that this is a reality. At least if you've got that, then you can go and test out how open they are to your experiences. The other important thing, and I know Barbara knows this, is that you go to someone who hasn't made up their mind about particular intelligences, whether they're good or bad and black and white, because if they're imposing their belief system on you, and they may very well do that, you've got to be very clear that they're non-judgmental about the intelligences that you are interacting with, because we've had researchers in the past that have actually had a very clear idea what they judge these beings to be, and that is not what you want. You want someone completely open to the experience, and your understanding of it, your interpretation is what matters, not theirs. So there's a lot of things that really need to be looked at if you want to feel like you're safe in going to see someone. And there's many beautiful therapists out there that are doing the QHHT, but many others that work in a beautiful holistic way. And I'm sure you're guided if you've got that kind of intent in your own head. This is what I need. I'm sure you'll be guided, or they'll be guided to the right person.
Great. Thanks so much.
Mary, I would like to just comment that as I am listening to you, I'm seeing a really bright, beautiful aura around your head and your shoulders. Does anybody else see that?
Always over that lovely lady.
Yeah.
I'm getting the gooses now.
Anyway, it's just beautiful.
Oh,
as you are. Yeah.
and I've always said that we're soul sisters, and I've always felt that when we met.
Absolutely. Me too. As you said once to somebody else about how we met, you said, when I saw Barbara, we just went bang. Do you remember that?
I do. It was instant, wasn't it? We just took one look at each other and that was it.
I know. And here we are, continents apart, and just don't get to see each other very often. Right.
I know.
That's really wonderful.
This is lovely. Now, I do hope we can do it again, because I'd like to be with each of you longer for this purpose.
Well, Barbara, if you could still hang out too, we'll just keep going until you are sort of have to go, I guess. But so on that same line, what advice would you each have to somebody who might want to become a therapist and help people in this way? Is there any tips or advice that you would offer to them?
Well, I think that they would certainly need to accept the fact that there is this part of reality going on, that there are many, many, many different people, beings out there in space who do visit humans and do a variety of things. And they'd have to have that kind of openness, obviously, first. Maybe they might be an experience themselves, or maybe not. I don't think one has to be experiencing these things in order to be very interested in them and help people with them. But you've got to be very open-minded. And I think the more open-minded and the more curious you are, the better in terms of doing therapeutic work in this particular way. So then, of course, it's very helpful to be licensed as a therapist and have good training in hypnotherapy, particularly regression therapy. I do hope more people will be going into this field because millions and millions of people worldwide are having these extraterrestrial encounters. And so the more therapists, the more regression people we have, well trained and open and interested and helpful, the better.
Absolutely.
Mary, anything to add on that particular note?
I think Barbara's, been very comprehensive. The main thing that I also would add to that is the more open they are to the multidimensional, in the sense of being aware that most of those that have experiences are opening up multidimensionally in their awareness, where, what we would call is psychic or intuitive, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. Those abilities start to expand the more they open to their experiences, and to have a therapist that understands how they can sense things or know things, that they may have downloads of information that they've not consciously learned, to understand the process of that. Because if you dismiss all of that, you're actually dismissing a lot of their experience, because that's what it is. They're interacting with these non-human intelligences intuitively, or psychically, clairvoyantly, clairsentiently. So if you don't understand that, you're going to dismiss it and not give it the importance that it deserves. It's not about our five senses. It's about our multidimensional senses as well. And for the therapist to actually appreciate that that's an absolute reality, and it's all to do with expanded consciousness.
Great.
Wow. To maybe shift gears a little bit, in terms of, we've talked about sometimes people will get healed or cured of something during one of these experiences. I've heard sort of anecdotally, and that's why I want to ask both of you too, if there's, like for example, I've heard that I don't know what percentage, right? But a good number of experiencers have potentially developed like a neurological sort of, issues or disorders after the experience that they didn't have previously. I've also heard anecdotally that there was a gentleman who might have to have his pacemaker retuned after having a close encounter with a craft. How often do you come across that type of thing, if at all? Like, is there anything to that, like, aspect of it?
Well, I personally never had anybody who was worse physically after an encounter. It's in fact, it's just the opposite, at least in the people I've regressed, that they get healed by the beings when they're on board, and sometimes they get healed by the beings when they're home in their own bed. Anyway, there are many, many cases that I have worked with and others have worked with, who have been healed by the extraterrestrials. So I am not personally aware of any people who've had adverse effects or have had a condition be worse after an encounter. How about you, Mary?
I'm with you on that as well, Barbara, because I've been aware of many cases of healing on board craft, of serious illness as well. And of course, the survey that we did with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, with the 4,200 individuals that were surveyed, 600 questions, 50% of them had healing on board craft.
Wow.
And of course, we've got people like Preston Dennett, who's written 100 documented healings and many other books on the healing side of it. But 50% of literally some really serious illness. And it has been quite amazing how also many of them have had information in their heads that is to do with new technologies and all the ways of our ecology, the way of free energy and what have you that's happened. So in that sense, it's been a very positive. And I will add to that 85% of that 4,200 people had psycho-spiritual transformation. 85%, which tells you a lot about what I see as a benevolent interaction.
Right. And you know, sometimes those people who were interviewed for the survey that you're referring to, Ray Hernandez and his group and Edgar Mitchell, that some of them may very well have realized later on, maybe even a few years later, that they were healed. Like you can look, a person can look back and think, gee, yes, I used to have that terrible stomach condition, and now I don't. I wonder, that's interesting. I wonder why that disappeared. I didn't get any good medical help for it. And then they might realize, oh, maybe it was by those other beings who had abducted me. Because I have had people had later on, even years later, realizations about things like that. And then they conclude that maybe they, have been healed. Excuse me, my client is here.
Okay, no worries. Well, thank you so much for joining us while you could. We appreciate it.
Here's Barbara.
So Barbara had to leave to see a client and do a regression, but we continued the conversation a little bit longer with Mary, and I want to just sort of get right into that because I had asked a question after Barbara left, and it was quite a fascinating answer.
Thank you, Mike.
So yeah, as I said, I mean, Mary, I was pretty surprised at that response because I had sort of heard it anecdotally from somebody well, I don't want to necessarily say exactly where, but who also helps experiencers that, a good number of people who have had experiences have neurological issues. So I wasn't expecting your response just now. That was very interesting.
I think that it's important to realize that we don't have just the, those that are having experience with non-human intelligences. Many of those that have had experiences are also accessed by military groups or deep state, call them Milab, military abductions. And the trauma in many cases has come from that, not their interactions with beings on the craft whatsoever. And that's been written about by Dr. Helmut Lemmer, Milab, human abductions, through the military who have the technology. And whenever I've worked with an experiencer group or experiencers, when they've been very heavily traumatized, it's been often as not their interactions with the Milab part of their experience that has caused the trauma. And people don't realize the complexity of that and how that can mess them up. And I'm going to add this, even though it sounds very weird and wonderful, is there is technology where these deep state operatives have cloned some of these beings, particularly the Greys or the Zetas, the reptilians particularly, and they can be programmed life forms that are not ET, that are part of the abduction experience. So people believe it's still ET when in fact it's actually not. So this is very complex. And it's something Dr. Greer has talked about a number of times, and I absolutely concur with that, because in these groups we had, when I talked about 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation, the 15% are still heavily in fear, that feel it's all ETs. Often as not, you'll find Milab interactions within that.
Wow.
That type of thing was somewhat covered in the movie Avatar, where they were creating hybrids of the local beings on the planet and basically using them as robots.
Well, there's a lot on it in Miles Johnson Basie's interviews in the UK, where he's interviewed whistleblowers that talk about seeing these program life forms in underground bases in the UK. But obviously, they're not just the UK. There are bases in Australia, America, obviously, and all around the world. And the whole idea of my lab is to find out what the experiencer is learning on board craft. What are they taught? What are they shown? What do they understand of the beings? So that these deep state operatives can find out exactly what the agendas are, what's the modus operandi, more about the beings. So it's basically interrogating them, drugging them, and other violent acts. I won't go into them now. And there's a really good book, Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light by Nayara Isley, who talks about her own experiences with Milab in detail. And she was part of the military and abducted by this deep state military, and what happened to her. She's just one person of many, many that have had the Milab experiences. And it's really important people understand that there's lots of agendas here.
So how does somebody differentiate between like a MyLab experience and an ET experience?
Well, sometimes they won't know the difference unless it's through hypnosis. And in hypnosis, they'll find themselves in an underground base. They'll not only perhaps see what looks like an ET, but they may see humans with white coats, lab coats, or whatever in the experience as well. So they'll see what seems to be a very human environment, like an underground bunker or place where there are human beings there as well as potentially these programmed life forms as well. And of course, the interaction's very human. The experiments that are done on them, the drugging that's done on them is all very, very human based. But, they can mix that up because of the fact that they've been on board craft as well. So sometimes they can be confused, but most times they'll tell you of a very human interaction where they've had experiences where they've been brutalized. And the reason that they get away with it often is because who's going to believe that our own species is doing that to another human being? So, Niara told me that she actually remembered it through body work. She was doing a lot of body work, energetic work, and these flashbacks started to come. And she didn't want to believe them. She couldn't believe them. They were too bizarre and too crazy. And she said, that she realized that very few people are going to believe that our own species are doing that to each other and whatever. But gradually, as she became more aware, she realized that this was really happening. And she was in contact with her own extraterrestrial communication and these beings. And she basically, and I'm going to go into the spiritual realm a little bit here, because she said, why are you allowing this to happen to me when you're supposed to be my family, my star connection and family and what have you? And they said that you agreed to this before you came here to expose what's actually happening. And once you'd exposed it by writing the book, no more of that will happen to you. And that was exactly what happened. So it was part of her mission to expose all of this. And that's why she actually wrote the book. Now, that's the other level, because when I work with people and I take them into a space to explore their experiences, one of the questions I ask is, have you, on any level, consented to this experience? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, before I came here. So that's the other level, the soul contract, if you like. And I'll say to them, does that resonate with you? Does that make sense to you? And they'll go, yes, it does.
Mary, you've just preemptively answered one of the questions I had, which is why do some of these experiences come forward to share the information when it could be detrimental to their social life or their employment eligibility? And also sometimes they hold clearances, so they definitely can't speak about it, but they still feel a compulsion to share it with us.
And quite honestly, it's all to do with what they feel from a deep superconscious soul level, that there's a timing to them disclosing their understanding and their reality. I mean, many of even those said as a child, I would be told, you can't talk about this. They would get the message, you can't talk about this, because it seems to be about a timing thing when I believe our collective consciousness is ready to embrace a greater reality. And this seems to be accelerating now, and has been, I think, since 2012. There's been this acceleration of activation of consciousness, where people are now saying, I need to talk about this now. They're saying, I need to talk about it now, and exposing, this greater reality to more of the public, because they're saying, activating others to want to do it as well, that are getting ready to do it. Because I believe this is not just thousands or millions. I'm talking about billions of people, I believe, on some level, have had this kind of interaction. They may not know what to make of it. They may not know how to interpret it. They may see it as a spiritual experience or just they're a bit strange or unusual. But ultimately, this kind of activation is happening, I believe, to create a collective awareness, a collective consciousness awareness. I mean, it's, consciousness, I believe, is primary to all of this.
So to go back to the Milabs real quick, how do the people who are conducting the military abductions know who to go and abduct and capture, as it were? Like, how do they know who the experiencers are? How do they pick them out?
I think there's multiple ways that they can do that. And one of them, we do know there's an intergenerational link to people who have experiences. And what happens when we get born, we have blood taken from us for various tests and what have you. They can also do DNA on anything that's unusual, and they've got many ways of getting access to that. There's also a frequency that individuals have that have contact. That may be also that they are able to now they see these craft coming in through portals and other dimensions, and visiting certain people as well. So there's lots of different ways they can isolate somebody who's having experiences, and that's why they often has as a child, you can't talk about this, you can't mention it to anyone. But they've got various ways through the blood, through the energy, through the fact that somebody is sharing their experiences. There's probably lots of other ways that I haven't even isolated that they can find out. And I know one gentleman in England was telling me that as soon as he uses his consciousness, and the craft will tap into his consciousness when they're actually coming in. And the military knew this and would be waiting for him to do that so that they could catch the craft as they're coming through the portal through his consciousness. So psionics is very much part of all of this, the whole side of it.
Mike, I've been hearing that the military have a way to detect if some Tesla-style over-unity device is being engaged or utilized. So somehow that pops up on some sort of field or radar array, and they can locate the position that's occurring. So that's not such a big stretch to me.
An over-unity device produces more power than it consumes. I'll post a link in the description of this video to an engineer that I found on YouTube who explains how exactly this device would work in theory. Well, that makes me wonder if, like, let's say general meditation, and you're putting your whatever out there, is somebody potentially seeing that? Or is that something different?
It might show up on some sort of field, some sort of radar system. It's quite possible.
The other thing is that we do know that those that do remote viewing or astral traveling and are picked up when they actually remote view somewhere or go onto a craft with their consciousness and are recognized and seen by the intelligences on that onboard craft and being told to back off or go away, that you're not welcome. So there's a lot of that to do with astral traveling. And what I will tell you is that when we did the survey of the 4,200, 75% said that their interactions were out of body, not physical. So only 25% were actually physical. So we're talking again about consciousness and consciousness being recognized. And let's face it, we all go astral traveling, whether we're aware of it or not, with our consciousness. And many of my those that will come to me will find it's not always their physical body that goes on board craft, it's their actual consciousness. And their consciousness may inhabit another form while they're actually on board craft. And I've got a number talking about the forms they will inhabit while they're actually on board craft.
Yeah, well, I know that Ingo Swan's version of remote viewing most certainly involved astral projection. I read his book and I listened to some of his lectures.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, I mean, are there certain geological areas or environmental certain environmental aspects or geographic areas that are more conducive to abductions than others? Is there any type of pattern whatsoever in terms of location or surroundings?
What I'd say is there are energy lines, ley lines across the planet that have been recognized now by a number of scientists and what have you, where I believe there's more chance of portals opening up. And I believe there's portals all over the planet anyway. But if, you know, one of the interesting things with experiences is sometimes one of the questions I put in, are you ever guided to go to remote places? Do you ever feel the need to go to somewhere remote? And they'll say, yeah, every now and again, I just want to be on my own, right in the middle of nowhere and whatever. And generally that's because they've been given the message to make themselves available, even though they're not aware of it. But they can pick you up right in the middle of a city if they need to. You know, it's not a big deal for them. They can cloak themselves very easily. But occasionally they will put a message in and that, you know, you want to go somewhere really quiet today. You know, really good place to, you know, at the bottom of this mountain somewhere, and they'll go because they just feel the need to do so. And then there's usually an experience that will happen. They are capable of all of that, and probably a lot more that I'm not even aware of. So this is, you know, if I live in a small little tourist town, I wouldn't like to tell you how many people here have had experiences in this little tiny tourist town. Doesn't really matter where you are. If you're important to them, they can access you.
On the ley lines, I was able to use Bruce Cathy's software, which I think from memory was called Grid Point Atlas. So Bruce Cathy, Mike, was a New Zealand pilot who correlated sightings with other pilots and was able to map them out and notice that there was a grid network over the Earth. He subsequently created some software. I used that software and I found that there were intersecting grid lines at the Westall School, and they also occurred at the Ariel School. There was a node point at both schools. So that's definitely an aspect to this.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
So Mary, you just sort of said that you know, if you or the person is important to them. So what makes one person important to them, being the ETs, of course, versus not? And perhaps a second part of that question is to talk about the blood type Rh negative, which is a rare blood type, and it's not necessarily 100%. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like 100% of abductees or experiencers are that, but an you know, overwhelming majority tend to be Rh negative. Is that accurate? And then does that play anything into, you know, somebody being picked or versus not picked?
I think this, for me, in what I'm learning, first of all, with the Rh negative, a preponderance of Rh negative seem to be of the right DNA, the right DNA, for want of a better word, that are having these experiences for some reason. It does seem to be a preponderance of them. I haven't fully isolated why, other than we're looking at the bloodlines that are important. We know that this is it's an intergenerational experience. So, for example, if someone comes to me and they're having experiences, one of the questions I will ask is, did your mum and dad or did your grandparents ever show any interest or were a bit different? And they would often say something like, oh, granddad was always into UFOs, or my grandma was very psychic, or whatever. And I say, right, there's the link to the bloodline that has been going through for generations. What I believe is happening is that these intelligences have been working with genetics right from when we were created as Homo sapiens sapiens, and they have invested interest in certain mixes of bloodlines, certain mixes of DNA. And so if you've got an interesting mix of DNA where they think they can enhance something or add something to, then it will be your family. And when someone says they're a hybrid, often what they're sensing is they've not only got the genetics of mum and dad, but they may have had an insert from one of their intelligences as well, which makes them, which is what they do. They're always mixing different DNA. And to give you an example of that, when an 8-year-old was talking to me about something she was really excited about in the US, and she asked her mum to talk to me because she knew her mum was talking to me already. And she told me about going up on the spacecraft, going and them taking her somewhere to learn how to levitate and to use her third eye and her psychic abilities. And she said, and then they showed me genetic engineering. This is an 8-year-old. And she explained that they showed her how they mix certain genetics to create new species, and they seed other worlds and other planets. And obviously that's what has happened here as well. In terms of that, this is what they do. So they're looking at certain bloodlines, certain abilities, as they're gradually, I believe, helping us to access more of who we are, so that we're being gradually upgraded or activated to more of our abilities and our awareness. And this is what, the awakening, I believe, is what we're talking about now, is people are having that activated and showing more and more abilities. So in terms of that, why are they interested in you? Because you may be one of the new ones, or having extra DNA that they're looking at, and they want to see how you progress. And many of them have medical exams on board craft, where they'll say, well, why did you pick me up this time? Oh, it's a medical exam just to check you out.
Thank you for asking that question, Mike. I've had some experiences in the past, which I haven't gone into in this podcast so far, but I'm actually RH negative, and so are both of my parents. So I've noticed that comes up too. And listen, we're all one, okay? So we're all equal. I don't think I'm better. I don't think I'm worse. We're all the same. But I've been interested in that topic because it relates to my biology.
I might snip this out, but I'm adopted, and my bio mom is Rh negative, so I've always sort of had a curiosity about that. So it's when I was asking about that, but anywho, so Mary, I'm kind of curious in terms of when somebody comes to you to be regressed. Is there any time that you don't take on a case? Like, is there any type of situation where you wouldn't want to work with them, or you feel like it wouldn't be beneficial?
Very rarely, and it's often been if they are not mentally stable. If they're already dealing with a lot of emotional, psychological issues, lots of trauma and what have you, that has made them very unstable in their lives, where they're not really handling their everyday life very well, then that's not a good time to start exploring this other level of awareness. I would say to them, get stable, start to operate, get more sort of grounded in terms of, what's going on in your life and what have you, to deal with the very 3D issues that are maybe causing them a great deal of trauma and upset. And wait till all of that is cleared, because this is not something you want to explore when you're going through, say, a marriage breakup, or, you've just suffering from grief because you've lost your mum or your dad, or, one of your children's died or whatever. If there's anything in their life that is extremely traumatic at this time, this is not the time to explore this other level of awareness, because it would be too much for them to handle. So that's the only thing primarily that I look at, is what is their stability, how are they, generally operating in a grounded kind of way. Then, okay, we can start looking at this.
That makes sense. Make sure your house is in order before you turn it upside down and shake it, right? In a layman's terms. Are there any times when regression or hypnosis would muddy the water, or the memories themselves?
The way that I have worked with this is that the only thing that is difficult when people need to understand the process of hypnosis is the difference between imagination and an experience, and knowing how to tell the difference. Because, a lot of people say, well, I just thought that was my imagination. So I explain to them the difference between a superconscious or subconscious memory and imagination. And it's actually really clear to know the difference. And I do that before I do any hypnosis, is to explain the difference, because otherwise they're going to be afraid maybe to say things that are coming up during the session, because they'll think, oh, maybe I'm just imagining that, or I've read it somewhere or whatever, and it creates a whole load of confusion. And I'm saying it's like this: something that's a reality, like your bedroom, you know where the bed is, you know where the window is, you know where the door is, because it's real and it's your bedroom. If I said to you, create or imagine a bedroom, you'd have to think to create it. Like, how big would the room be? Where would I put the bed? Where would I put the window? What color would the curtains be, or whatever? It requires a different process. So when they're in hypnosis and I say, what happens next? There's nothing there to create. Either something happens next or it doesn't. And then they can say, oh, well, in front of me is a light. Okay, so what happens next? So you're not giving them any feedback to create anything. You're literally asking the subconscious, we know something's going on, show us the next part of that. You know, what are you standing on? I'm not telling them what they're standing on. I'm asking them what they're standing on. Look down, look at your feet. What are you standing on? Are you inside or outside? There's nothing to create with that. And once they know the difference, then they're more inclined to let it run, because the trouble is getting left brain in the way, which is why you take them into trance, because that, you know, left brain wants to edit everything that doesn't feel normal, because right away, if you get your left brain in, it's saying, well, you can't say that because that's too weird. So then you don't say it. So that's the whole reason for taking them into an altered state. So you limit the left brain's input so that you allow the subconscious, superconscious then to unveil the memory. And the subconscious records everything without editing. Literally everything you've ever experienced is there on that tape. You've just got to access the right point in that. And so you're asking the subconscious, this is what we want to explore, take us to it. And there's nothing there to feed the imagination. There's nothing there to create. It's either there or it's not there. And that's why I believe you can trust it, because often things come out that the person afterwards says, oh my God, you know, I don't know if I can believe that or whatever. And I often say to them, do you think that you would have ever created that, or you would have imagined that? And 9 times out of 10, they said, not in a million years. Not in a million years would I have ever come out with that. That's giving it integrity.
Okay. Rep Stu, any other questions?
Okay, I do have a question. I was imagining that perhaps in the future, you and Barbara could form some sort of mentorship for some new people coming up doing this kind of therapy, or a course. You ever talked about that or discussed that together?
Not with Barbara. I mean, we've both got our own process. I created one called MISS, Multidimensional Information in a Superconscious Trance State. And it really is about the therapist being able to understand the multidimensional side of it, because it's really important that a therapist understands that everyone that has experiences opens up more to their intuitive side, you know, their multidimensional side, and understands that. I'm not sure how Barbara does her work. We've never really discussed it. And I suppose we're both very happy with our process. Mine is a lot shorter than the QHHT, which is a lot more in depth and takes a lot longer. Mine is a little bit faster than that because it works. I found it works, you know. So for me, I've cut that down. But I, you know, we all have our unique way of working. But I have taught mists to a few groups in the US and UK, and every so often I'm asked if I will show my own particular process of working. And as long as the therapist is already, you know, has already done hypnosis and has already done counseling, I can actually give them the next level to that, because I work with the multidimensional side as well, which is...
I think that's incredibly important, and I really honor and respect what you're doing with that work.
Well, if somebody's having multidimensional experiences, if you don't understand how it works, you're not much use to them. You know, if you're not going to honor the fact that they have... Many of my clients, I'll say, do you feel presences around you, for example? Well, yes, I do. Do you see orbs? Do you get information downloaded in, you know, to you that you haven't consciously learned? Yes, I do. Right. Okay. So then who is that that's giving you that information? Is it from another part of you, or is it to do with these intelligences that you're interacting with? Well, it always feels good and it's always accurate. Right. Well, let's find out who these intelligences are. So I actually help them access who it is that's working with them on another level. If you don't know how to do that, and you're not comfortable with it, or you're not able to understand it, you're not much use to someone who's having these experiences, are you? Is it that you can't do this just on a linear level, on a 3D level, because it's multidimensional communication.
This has opened up my eyes even more than they've already been. I don't know what else to say. Thank you so much for spending some more time with us again.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Love to you as always.
Likewise.
Both of you. Thank you for what you're doing, because it's so important that you're helping disseminate this information and helping so many people. So thank you, guys.
All right, Reverend Stu, what do you have to say about this conversation?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, and ask you, did you notice how beautiful the energy was between them? I was absolutely loving
my
it.
gosh. Yeah, I felt it. It was a wonderful, wonderful energy between both of them. And I'm looking forward to having both of them back again and doing a more at length conversation with them.
There's so much wealth of information from both of them, which I'm really grateful that they're sharing with us. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to hear from both of them.
It absolutely is. And the question I asked Mary about that we ultimately started talking about Milabs, which I wasn't necessarily expecting in this particular conversation, was rather fascinating to me, and it really sort of put some pieces into place for me. Like you and I had talked about, we've referred to Tucker Carlson saying, "Oh, it gets dark. I don't want to tell my family about this. I've heard enough. I don't want to hear more." And I don't know what he heard, but these military abductions could very well be that.
Well, I have wondered for a while if some of these people who get injured have been exposed to back-engineered craft, that maybe there's some volatile aspects to those craft, something that's a bit dangerous to come near, to come into contact with. And I suspected that was what was occurring.
Could very well be, because it was the anecdotal question that I put out there to both of them originally, that not a lot, but a handful or enough to make a comment about, of experiencers have potential neurological things happen that they didn't have before. And I wasn't expecting the answers that came forward, and especially I wasn't expecting the follow-up question to go into that topic.
Yeah, I guess that side of things can be a little bit dark, and on one hand, I'd sort of like to avoid that, but it is part of the whole equation here.
It is, and it's farther down the road, less traveled, right? To quote Scott Peck, the author. And it's tough for people. I mean, I've even expressed my own skepticism many episodes ago when we even brought up military abductions, and I believe Mary had brought that up when in our solo conversation with her originally too, and that's really when it started to hit home in a way. It's like, okay, there's actually some truth to this, because when I hear something like that from a Mary Rodwell, who has been a professional therapist for decades, there's a lot more credence to than just some person on the internet saying it. No, this is a professional person who's been studying this in depth for a very long time. So there's a lot more weight or gravitas to that statement coming from her.
Well, I've pondered this before, and the intelligence mechanism would view some of these people as infiltrators, and people, I'm talking about entities, non-human intelligences, and they might view the people that come into contact with these non-human intelligences as infiltrators too. I'm talking about them viewing this whole phenomena through a negative lens, a suspicious lens, where they want to know what's happening here. Who are these people coming into our world? What are their objectives? Now, I'm not condoning any of this behavior, but I can see where this thrust might be coming from.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I can also sort of see the other side of it. And if I were to put myself into their shoes, which I wouldn't, but if I do, just for the sake of the conversation, perhaps they're thinking they're doing this for the greater good, or they're trying to sell the message, but the way in which they're going about doing it is just repulsive, quite frankly.
Yeah, I don't want to empathize or sympathize with their situation. They've got a role to play. And once again, I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying I can see where this sort of misguided approach might be coming from.
Yeah. So just to in the episode that is coming out right now, that at the time that we're doing this recording, you and I are talking about why aren't people getting that big disclosure that they're wanting, and I think we've put out some really good reasons for it. This is another. It sort of dovetails right into that last episode.
It does, which makes me really appreciate and respect the people that are coming forward. They're such brave people, Mike, and they're really trying to help move this whole thing forward. I really respect them.
They certainly are. And I support and cheer on everyone who has been and who is thinking about coming forward. And specifically by that, I mean like the whistleblowers and the people who are shedding light on this topic. Because it is a very difficult thing to come forward and talk about. And you had mentioned, I think even in our last episode too, that the spirituality or the esoteric or the psionic, I think it's all sort of in a way, the same thing or very similar to each other. That is now really coming to the fore. And that's brand new stuff that we haven't really heard about too much at all up until this last couple of months, essentially.
Well, interestingly for me, when the military whistleblowers come forward with that information, that layer of the information, it actually makes me feel more confident in what they're saying, because that's something I don't feel they would bring forward or make up. And there'd be a reluctance to even get into those topics, but they're just right there at the moment.
Indeed they are. To sort of circle back to the beginning, that was a fantastic to have both Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb on screen at the same time. That I can tell that they know each other well and they love each other. Their energy is amazing, and we've asked that we can maybe do this again in a longer session, and they're both open to that as well.
Oh, I'm definitely up for more of that, Mike. Can't wait to get that happening.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So as always, please do share these conversations and drop a comment below. Ask us questions if you want to. Or what did you like about it? What do you want us to cover next time or whatever? And thanks for subscribing and helping us put these conversations out to the world for free. Tell the robot that other people want to or should hear these conversations. All you got to do is hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it, all that good stuff. It's free. Button pushes. Do. Easy stuff.
Thank you. And as always, much love for embarking on this journey with us and sharing. It's just fantastic. Great to have you along.
And you know what? One last thing too, for anyone who's sticking around to the very end, Stuart, up until sort of season 2, as we've called it, right? That was, I did learn information in every conversation that we've had, and I'm glad that we've had them. But in a way, it was more about setting the stage and sort of building up the case to get to this point of where we are right now. And I can honestly say, at least for me, we are officially and literally documenting our own journeys now more so than ever as we explore this topic. Because today with Barbara and Mary, that was amazing. There was some pieces of the puzzle that got put into place for me, and I can't wait until our next conversation with them and others.
That's a big part of this for me too, Mike. I'm really enjoying it. Now, I don't know everything about this phenomena. I don't know everything about other people's experiences. So when we correlate with other people and just calibrate, it's very informing for me, and I'm super grateful to be on this journey with everyone. Much love to you.